Welcome to the Stop Down Photography Podcast, episode 83. I'm Scott Davenport. Today's topic is Get Motivated with a Photo Meetup. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining me. I'm glad to be back with you for another chat about photography, this passion we share. And in today's episode, let's take one more step on our never-ending journey of photography. After a year plus of pandemic conditions, staying indoors, growing accustomed to the new normal of limited interaction with the world, it's produced a new kind of problem for photographers: inertia. I've certainly fought a lack of motivation during the last year, and in this past week, as luck would have it, I got to meet up with a longtime photo buddy, and I am so glad that I did. I want to talk about it in today's episode. If you enjoy the podcast, please share it with a friend on social media, with your camera club, and if you can, leave a rating for the podcast. Current ratings help other photographers find the show. You can rate directly in the Apple Podcasts app or on the web at podchaser.com. Links are in the show notes. A couple of years ago, before the pandemic, before everything changed, I'd be out with my camera at least twice a week. And in addition to my own field work, photo meetups were common. We'd meet up with other photographers, sometimes just by happenstance. Maybe a photographer you didn't even know and became a photo buddy. It was a very different time, really, right? Part of my recurring meetups pre-pandemic, I co-hosted a video podcast with my good friend Pablo. We did this for about a year or so. And even outside of the podcast, we'd regularly meet up to capture some images and just talk about photography. So fast forward to now. The fates had me heading to a spot in the greater San Diego area near Spencer's stomping grounds, and I knew I'd have a few hours of time there, so called him up. Hey, are you around? It's been basically forever. How about we meet for coffee? And that's just what we did. I'll give you a little context about Spencer Pablo. He is a Sony artist of imagery, primarily a portrait photographer. Natural light, available light, outdoor work kind of stuff. Families and seniors, some commercial work, but people in situation and commercial settings are always in a neighborhood or just out in the world. So I meet up with Spencer. We get to talking about photography, as photographers do, and we both exchange the same kinds of stories where we have this motivational problem now, this inertia that's built up over time because of the way that the pandemic changed our relationship with photography. In Spencer's world, portraits and doing photographs of people and for businesses was radio silence for a few months right when the pandemic started. The needle basically dropped to zero. For me, the landscape photographer, many of the places I would go and photograph were just closed. You couldn't go to the beaches, couldn't go to certain parks. You just couldn't really go out and be doing anything. During this period, right, you're familiar with this, we've all had shifts in priorities where our go-to activities, whether it is photography as your primary occupation or photography as your core passion, the day-to-day, the week-to-week photography gets removed from our lives for a few months or longer, and we start to focus on other things. Fast forward to around now, society is a little more mobile, things are a little more open, there's still restrictions, but we can move around, we can interact with the world, we can get out with our cameras, but it can be hard to go back. And for things that we want to do and want to do again, finding the right way to do them, finding the safe way to do them is one part of it, but being motivated to do them, to get ourselves off the proverbial couch, has been challenging. And the more I was talking with Spencer, the more we swapped stories about our other photographer friends hitting the same kind of wall. The world is open enough that you could book a client shoot or you could plan a landscape outing. But that inertia is hard to overcome. That lack of motivation to shoot is a common theme. It still runs among us as photographers. And so what was really going to be like, a quick, maybe 30, 40-minute meeting turned into this 2+ hour conversation. And of course, we talked about a whole ton of stuff beyond photography, because I think I've seen him once in the last 8 months, hadn't really sat down and talked in more like 18 months. But the reason I share this story with you, at the end of this meetup, we both parted feeling more energized. Certainly speaking for myself, it was reassuring to hear I wasn't the only one wrestling with motivation to go out and shoot. I wasn't the only passionate photographer with this inertial barrier to bust through. And even though our cameras never came out of the bag, maybe just other than a selfie to commemorate the meeting, the conversation sparked something. It reminded me of the times before the pandemic. Now, the world has changed for sure, but it's how we interact with the world that's really changed. For the landscape photographer, the scenery hasn't become any less gorgeous. The sunrises and sunsets are still just as beautiful. The ocean is just as mesmerizing as it was pre-pandemic. I left this meetup wanting to get out and create again. And to think that I almost didn't call him up. I almost didn't reach out to my photo buddy. Because I was like, oh, I don't want to bother him. He's probably busy. He's got something going on. And I'm really glad that I did. And so was he. So chances are, your photo buddy, the one that you haven't talked to in a while, probably feels the same way you do. I encourage you, reach out, have the conversation, talk about photography, even if the cameras don't come out of your bag. Just the act of talking about photography, sharing your stories, that can be motivating and get you back out with your camera. Thinking about a secondary theme, perhaps, that came out of this conversation I had with Spencer is how we are able to take something out of a negative situation and make it a positive, right? COVID threw a lot of things on its head. A lot of our routines needed to change, a lot of adaptations to make, and in some areas, the shakeup of routine yields net benefits. For Spencer, he was telling me how he's been incorporating more video into his work. So doing commercial work with video. Think like Reels for Instagram. Someone wants a 15-second spot of their product, and he's been setting up a rig at his house to do this type of video work. He also converted his garage into a portrait studio. The studios that he would normally work with, well, they were closed. Converted a space, and now that's become his primary place of business. And even though he likes doing outdoor work and outdoor photography, available light photography, something to be said for that studio setup. He's telling me, the lighting's the same, whether it's 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. And that has allowed him to keep the business going and keep clients flowing through and do it in a safe and controlled manner. For me, it's been focusing more on health. A landscape photographer, when I'm out in the field, I need to be able to hike and climb and carry my pack and stay in good shape. In the early months of the pandemic, that was hard to do. Well, made sure to make that a priority. And also just the shifting up of exploring different landscapes. I go to the ocean all the time. I will never lose my love for the ocean, but seeking out landscapes that would be less crowded has brought me to places that I might not have gone otherwise, and I've found and captured wonderful photos as a result. So that's another source of motivation, and maybe a source to overcome any inertia that you have of getting out with your cameras. Speaking of getting out with our cameras, I am hosting a workshop in Oregon in November, and one space has just opened up. There's 6 photographers I'm taking on this adventure through the Oregon coast. It runs November 15th through the 18th, 2021, based in Florence, Oregon. It's about Central Coast and gives us great access to a whole lot of wonderful, wonderful coastline and a couple of little hidden inland spots that I plan to take folks to as well. The cost for this workshop is $12.95. It's one space opened up. It'd been sold out for a bunch of months. One person, unfortunately, had to cancel, and that means you have an opportunity to take that spot if you'd like to join me and some of your landscape-inclined photographer friends for a 4-day workshop in Oregon. Link is in the show notes, and I hope that you'll join us on what's going to be a wonderful, wonderful workshop. I cannot say how much I'm looking forward to getting out with the cameras on the Oregon coast. Another item I made a mental note in last week's podcast to follow up on. I was talking last week about photo industry news and what does it do for us artistically. The one announcement I wasn't able to talk about in that podcast because it hadn't been made public yet was Luminar Neo from Skylum. And so I did want to come back to this and mention a few points about Luminar Neo. I have a full video and blog post describing what I know about this product today and the details. So link is in the show notes if you want to go deeper than what I describe here. But, what Skylum's done, it seems to be their business model. They have reinvented their product, air quotes, reinvented, air quotes, again with Luminar Neo. And when I say reinvented, it really means that there is no migration path from previous versions of Luminar products. So Luminar AI, Luminar 4, these have all become islands unto themselves from the point of view of a central hub for your photography. Now for plug-in workflow users, really not much of a problem. Your hub is something else. On One, Lightroom, Capture One, whatever it might be, and you're using other tools to augment that editing. So that's something to know about Luminar Neo. But what is it really? What is it planning to deliver? First and foremost, this is an announcement only. The product doesn't exist outside of Skylum. We can't play with it. I haven't seen it in action. Just been given some briefings on what's in the product. Primarily, it's adding more AI, and it's doing things that build upon what we've seen in Luminar AI. Recognizing people, being able to change the background, relighting scenes to alter the tone, the mood, the coloring, all with a very simple tool set. Usually one or two sliders and you're covered. It's bringing back layers. If you're into layered workflow or doing more compositing or blending, layers come back into the product. And a couple of other things they teased too is like some automatic background cleanup. Think like dust removal. Finds a whole bunch of dust spots, gets rid of them for you right away. Power lines, removes power lines from the backgrounds of your photos. That one I'm intrigued by because if I'm able to use something that would automatically remove power lines, even just once or twice a month, that's worth it to me. Which brings me to what does this thing cost? They're doing some pre-order specials they call early bird specials that run through September 19th, 2021. And it ends at 8 a.m. Eastern, so it's not even the full day of September 19th. So there still are a few days to take advantage of the pricing. If you already own a Luminar product, Luminar 4, Luminar AI, a Luminar Neo license costs $34. That's a pretty good deal. And there's some additional pricing for multiple licenses or a combination of Luminar AI and Neo. Details are on the web link that's in the show notes. If you're a new user, that price becomes $54 for a single license of Luminar Neo. Again, this is early bird pricing. Early bird is defined as the first 30,000 customers. As I record this, I checked and there were about 10 to 11,000 licenses left. So they are moving pretty quickly. I'm recording this a little less than halfway into the early bird pricing time frame. So the licenses are going. So if you hear this, you think you might want it, I'd say go ahead and pick it up, especially because they give you a 30-day money-back guarantee. And that 30 days is from when Luminar Neo ships. not from when you make the purchase. They're going to ship it sometime in the winter, which is vague. I'm reading that as mid-December if we're fortunate, January 2022 if they have some spit and polish they need to put in the product. But from the day that they ship it, you have 30 days to go, no, this isn't for me, and return it. I think it's a good buy for those of us that use Luminar products as a plug-in as part of a bigger workflow. If you're a Lightroom user, if you're an On1 user, you're a Capture One user primarily, you like Luminar products for AI, check out Luminar Neo, and I'd say take advantage of this early bird pricing. $34 for a plugin that can do a whole bunch of AI and has a bunch of other good tools in it. To me, that's a bargain. Again, more details at the link in the show notes. A thank you to everyone that has supported this podcast through comments, reviews, shares on social media. These are all zero-cost ways that you can support this podcast, and there are several more zero-cost ways. Check the show notes for a link, or if you're on stopdownpodcast.com, on every page there is a support the show button. Click that. It will tell you a variety of different ways you can support the show. And if you wish to support the podcast financially, there's an option there for you too. Special thanks to the members of the Patreon community. It is your pledges that make the podcast possible. It's keeping it on the air. And you're just a wonderful bunch of photographers. You're like the board of directors. I'm able to ask you a question, tell you something I'm thinking about. You give me some honest feedback that I trust because I know that you're in this for the long term. You're there because you say, hey, I want more of the style of photographic news, thoughts, tutorials that you bring. So thank you very much for your continued support. If you'd like to learn more, check the show notes. Everything's in the show notes. And that'll wrap it up for this week. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Again, if you can, please rate it on Apple Podcasts. You can also find the episodes at stopdownpodcast.com, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. You can think of a place you can get podcasts. You'll find the Stop Down Photography Podcast. Until next time, my name is Scott Davenport. Have fun.